morning, everybody. I know it's been a couple weeks since my last video. I apologize for that. It was right before the U.S. Veterans Day, so I'm going to continue on with this cup. Going to be applying the next coat. It still has everything is solid on here. The base and the glitter is well hardened. So the next step is to get a coat on there so that our uh, decals can all stick to it. And so we'll it will turn from that into this. This one is ready to be sanded, and it is really rough is what it'll end up being, just like the way this one is showing. So let's get to it. All right, so I've got my cup on the spindle here. Now I'm going to turn it on. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm taking my little brush here, and I'm just going to brush off. I've got my plates underneath, and I'm brushing off any excess glitter that's still sitting there. Because what will happen is as you go to pour that epoxy on and pull it up, that excess glitter will start pulling into the other colors. Now, if you've got one solid color, this really doesn't matter. While I'm doing this, I've also got my epoxy mixing. So if you don't mind it pulling across the colors, some of them come out really cool, while others it ends up mixing out and a little bit iffy. So you just try to brush off all the excess glitter that didn't get pulled into the epoxy. And you just want to keep working all the sides until you get no more excess glitter coming off, or as much excess glitter coming off as possible. Because the more excess glitter you get coming off, the less that'll spread as you go to spread your next layer of epoxy. A little bit's not too bad. And one thing I want to point out is you see that how the white is showing red in here. That's actually the base color that we painted the color red. I know it doesn't seem very red on camera, but if you see it in person, it's actually showing very red in person. And make sure you don't forget the bottom, since we glittered the bottom. Shouldn't be much there because we didn't put much glitter on there. But putting an excess of glitter, there should be quite a bit. And I think we're at a good spot there, so I'm going to pull my plates out. And see, that's the amount of glitter that came off the cup. And all that would have pulled across the entire cup. And I do still have a bunch of glitter still on that didn't catch on the plate that fell onto my mat here. But that's not a big issue. I don't usually rest my hands onto the mat, I'm sorry. So now it's just a matter of waiting on the epoxy to finish mixing. All right, so we've got everything ready. Our epoxy's all mixed up. It's all set. So now we're going to pour, just like with the base layer before applying glitter. Just going to do nice even pours and spread it over just like with our fingers. Now I mixed up a little bit more epoxy because it's got to get down into the glitter, because inside, even though it's ultra fine glitter, there's still going to be pockets, and it takes a little bit more epoxy. As you'll see, it doesn't spread quite as well as it would on just a blank cup. Now on the next layer, as you'll see, it will spread much more evenly and it doesn't take near as much, but you still just want a very, very, very fine layer on top of the glitter. And that's why this layer ends up being really rough, because you still want the glitter to show through, but all this does is create a nice even base layer for your decals or uh, whatever it is you want to decorate it with, if you even want to decorate it. Sometimes you may just want a nice pretty glitter cup. But you just keep spreading it on. As you can see there, I went a little bit thick there. At least I hope you can see there. But let me know in your comments if it's hard to see, if it's easy to see, so I can make adjustments in the future. Because I hope to do these videos with everything I make in the future. Because it's not just going to be cups. I'm going to start doing videos with everything that I'm going to be making in the future. And you follow the same pattern. I don't know if you can hear it, but can you hear the scraping as my fingers run across it? Now imagine all that loose glitter will be dragging right across that. And the more you work it into that, the more you work the epoxy into the glitter, the less of a layer you're going to have. And the deeper the layer of epoxy that you do have, the heavier the cup becomes. Now I've done one or two cups with the really thicker layer, really thicker glitter, and it starts to become very, very challenging. I'll do videos with working with the thicker glitter, the fine, and so on. But as you can see, I've used quite a bit of epoxy here. See if I can get a good shot of the epoxy. Not really. I've used already about half, just trying to work it into the glitter. But as I've said before, epoxy is very forgiving, especially as it starts to do its chemical reaction or exothermic reaction. And exothermic or endothermic, my old science teacher would be very disappointed that I've forgotten that. It's been a few years, almost 25 years for me since I was in high school. In fact, I was visiting my old high school just last week, earlier this week, doing a presentation. And what I mean by that is that the epoxy will start to heat up as it does its reaction. And you want a good light on the back side of this because you can see where it's very rough, where you don't have a good layer of epoxy, where you maybe need to get a little bit more, or where you've got a little bit thick. And you can also use the feel of it. But I can feel where there's certain layers where it's really thick and really thin. But in this stage, it's not as critical because once it hardens, you're going to sand it down. Either apply decals, apply whatever it is you want to, and put another layer of epoxy on there. Whether you apply something or not, you're still going to put another layer of epoxy on after you sand it down. And it's going to look funny when you sand it down. It's going to be grayish and not very pretty. But that's what you want, and the next layer of epoxy will fill in all that sanding. And just like with before, you just take your I always just take my finger here and apply the epoxy with my finger because it doesn't take much for the bottom. Because if you try to pour on, it's just going to pour right down into your mat. As it is, it's spilling right off my finger because I have a little bit too much onto my finger. And then I start at the center once I get a good coating on there and push it to the bottom to try and make that sure that coat becomes nice and even on the bottom. And let it go a couple full rotations And if you end up with really thick spots, like maybe a big chunk of glitter or anything like that, that'll all start to even itself out once you do your first sanding. And the thinner your coats go, one, the way that the weight of your cup will end up being on the finished product, and two, the more coats you may feel like you can add to it. If you feel like you need to add additional coats to it. I've put up to three coats of epoxy on just to make sure that my finished product looks absolutely phenomenal. Whether it be something wasn't sitting just right, and then I start my process of just evening it all out. And as you do that, between each stroke, you'll see little ridges start to form. But as the epoxy is doing its thing, doing its reaction to set, those will level themselves out. The biggest thing is getting a lot of the thick layers. And you'll feel that. So if you've got some areas that is, you can feel the glitter through it. So it's really rough from the glitter, but then some areas it's really smooth. So you're feeling the epoxy. Just take and wipe it off into your cup, into your epoxy mixer cup, like I'm doing. Because you want to try and get it as even as possible. Even though it should balance itself out, it won't always. And again, just like before, I do a nice wraparound on the lip to make sure that it gets the lip. Just when you go to sand this layer, and I'll show you in the next video once this sets and hardens, it's just going to be a light sanding, so you don't end up sanding into that glitter. Even if you have a really high thick spot, you're not going to sand too much into that thick spot unless you've got a really fine tooth sander to get into that area. And I've already seen in two spots where there's a really thick spot because of a thick chunk of glitter that got mixed in with the ultrafine. And as the epoxy is applied, you can actually see where the red is showing through. On the base layer, it's not quite as white anymore. So now I'm going to do one more at the base here after pulling it all up, because I didn't quite do a good wraparound on the bottom lip like I like to do. And it's not trying to do a good, real thick coating. All it is trying to make sure that a coating does get on there. Because I don't like it thick, I like to keep some grip on there. So if you set it down somewhere, it'll stay. And then one final swipe on the bottom to make sure that that smooths out as it's setting. All right. And there we have it. Now let's see if this piece will come back around. See if I can point it out to you here. See if you can see it. Okay, it's coming back around. It's actually got a point to it right here. And there we have it. All right, well, thanks for joining me on this video. That's all we have for today. Well, for this session anyway. It's real quick and simple on just applying a coat of epoxy to give a coating to over the glitter. Make sure to like and subscribe to this channel. Y'all have a great rest of your day.